Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're not going to work on cars, but I have to do some work on the house. I have to change the wall tiles in the kitchen. So these are the tiles I placed on the wall about 4 years ago, and those are synthetic. So kind of a plastic synthetic rubber, and they are self-adhesive, so very easy to put on the wall actually. So I prepared the wall, I made sure everything was good, that the wall was adhesive enough, and then I start placing these tiles on the wall. But over time, and when I say over time, it's less than a year, they started to deform, they started to curl up, and they pulled themselves off the wall. So I had to re-glue them over and over again. So now it's time to get them replaced, but let me show you what they do. And this is one of them, and look how easy they come off the wall, and you can see I already have used double-sided tape and all that. Although the back is still a bit sticky, but you can see that they actually curve, that they are not flat anymore, and that's been the issue with these tiles. So my recommendation is never use this kind of tiles, self-adhesive synthetic tiles for a wall in a kitchen. Buy the real stuff. And that's not the only one. Look, there's another one here. I can just peel them off like that. Some of them are a bit more tight, and you can see I've tried to glue them on already in certain places. This one is a bit more tough, but you will see, we'll get them off. There we go, it's off. So all this will have to come off, and then we'll have to prepare the wall again for new ceramic tiles. So let me remove all this, and then we'll talk about the ceramic tiles. Now I know when you put ceramic tiles up, you need to do all these cutouts around your wall sockets and around your light fixtures, and that can be a little bit of an annoyance, but with the right tools that should be no real issue. So with the wall sockets removed, now I'm going to remove the trim so I can actually put the tiles behind the trim. Now it might be that we may have to adjust the trim. Some of them come off pretty easy, others are a little bit more tough. Because some of them I have re-glued. See, with these, it's easy. You can cut this out with a Stanley knife, but if you're going to use ceramic tiles, then we have to grind all this out. Right, that looks good. Now, but I have to disassemble the hood. I already took the top part off because there are tiles in the back. So now I need to unlock the hood from the wall, and it's like 2 big bolts, and then I can take that off, and then we can remove these tiles in the back, because you have to remove everything you can remove, so when you put the new tiles up, everything comes on top of it. Otherwise, it is not going to look right. All right, this should be it. Okay, here we go. All right, we've got all the tiles off the wall, and it was quite a bit of a mess, as you can see. Now it's time to clean this up, and after this is cleaned up, I will put a surfacer onto this drywall here because there's a lot of little things that are a little bit loose, and you want to have a good solid ground to put the ceramic tiles up. So let me get rid of this, and then we continue. So most of the dirty work is now done, and before I'm going to install the ceramic tiles, I need to find out exactly where I'm going to place them, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But before I do so, I want to make sure that the wall is actually powder-free, dry, that there are no loose parts on it. Now I know the wall is very dry, but you might see little pieces of paper here and there because it is drywall. Now to make sure that everything sticks very well, I'm going to use a sealant, first of all, that will make sure that the glue of the ceramic tiles will really attach and stick to the wall. And the product that I use to stabilize the wall is what we call compactuna. And it's kind of a white plastic emulsion. Pretty good stuff. Typically you use it in cement and concrete to have a better bonding. So this is what I'm going to put on the wall now with this big brush here. And I'm going to let it dry overnight, and then tomorrow morning we can start installing the tiles. So let me start doing this. But before I do so, I have to place some plastic up, because otherwise I'm going to spoil the top here. So that always is helpful. And I used my brush before, and you see how quickly it dries up, because my brush is already stiff. But anyway, it's gonna get loose again if I use it a little bit. But I think you can find other products on the market instead of compactuna. But compactuna just works fine for me. I've used it so many times without any problems. It's still a little bit sticky, so I'm going to let it dry overnight, and then we can install the ceramic tiles. Now, in terms of ceramic tiles, I'm going to show you what I'm about to install. And you probably wonder, what kind of crazy stuff is that, Steve? This is one big mess of different profiles and different patterns. Well, in the old days, we used to use these patterns on floors, and quite often, when there were leftovers, they took tiles with different patterns and they placed it on a wall somewhere in a washing room or something like that. So this is a bit the same thing. This being a very old house, I'm trying to have that same mix here, but now of course with new tiles. So our wall is now dried up, and we are about ready now to start installing the tiles. But the question is, where do I start? Do I start on the right-hand side, or do I start on the left-hand side? Because how is that going to work out with the tiles? Because the last thing I want is a 1 or 5 centimeter tile on one side, and then, you know, on the other side I have a full tile in these openings. So if I have a small strip here of 1 centimeter, or half an inch for that matter, and then I have here a full tile, that doesn't look good, does it? So you want to create some kind of symmetry when you put the tiles onto the wall. Now, of course, you are constrained with the dimensions of the tiles, because you have no choice really. And you're constrained with what your kitchen looks like. You have big openings, you have all kind of dimensions. So you can't really map it all out 100%. But nevertheless, my common rule is always, when you walk into a room, what is the wall that you see first of all? What is the wall or the area which is catching the eye? What is the biggest surface, for instance? And that is where I like to start putting tiles up. And in this case, I have two options. I have a big surface right here, and I have a big surface right here, which is even bigger. Now this one is probably going to catch more the eye than this area. So I'm going to start right here, and to figure out how to start, I will have to measure my tiles and then see how they fit in this opening. So if I take the two tiles, I could place them somewhere in the middle, and then on the left and on the right I have some small areas left. I have an area left here to fill in, and I have the same distance here if I place those in the right spot. That would be good. However, if I start installing the tiles like this on one side in full, and then I'm going to carry on, then you'll see on the right hand side there, I have like a fairly big tile, but it's not a full tile, it's almost like half a tile, and you get kind of an asymmetric distribution of that, and I don't like this. So for me, I'm going to start right here in the middle and then work it my way out to the left and work it my way out to the right. So for that opening, that will work out just fine. But what happens once I start building from that middle line all the way out? What happens here? Well, if you want to figure that out, you could make a little sketch. And I made a sketch right here of these openings. I know the size of my tiles, and then you can just draw that up and measure it all out. Now let me show you what I've done here and how this is going to work out. Now all that depends a lot on the size of the tiles you're having and the size of your walls and so on. But that's one way. Some people even like to draw it to scale. So if that's what you like to do, draw it to scale. I'm not going to do this. This is for me a waste of time. And I don't have a lot of time, to be very honest. So let me show you what I've done. I measured all the dimensions. So this big opening we just looked at is 88 centimeters. I measured it all out and then scribbled it down on a piece of paper. It's not to scale. I also know the size of my tiles. So we already decided we would go middle line here in this big opening. So I would have one tile fitting here, I would have another tile that fits there, and then I had like half a tile on each side. So now we have a nice equal pattern there. That is easy to calculate because I know one tile is 34 centimeters, and then I have 10 centimeters left and right? So that is actually then making up the 88 centimeters in total. So that is 44 plus 44 is 188 centimeters. Oh my God, that's too early in the morning. Anyhow, so this I have now worked out. And from that point on, here, I'm going to keep building out that way towards the corner. Now I know this is 90 centimeters. So again, I can count how many tiles that is. And the last tile will be about 26 centimeters, not a full one. And I can work my way out towards the other direction as well, and then you just calculate. Now don't forget to include a gap in between the tiles, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but that's typically only a few millimeters. On this side right here, I'm going to have a 13 centimeter fill-in, and here I will also have some fill-in. So for me, this is going to work out just fine. This part here will not be fully symmetric. I mean, there are limits. You cannot have it both from both worlds. That's impossible. You're going to need some tools and some materials to put the tiles onto the wall. Of course, you will need your tiles, and that depends what type of tiles you have, what are the dimensions, and of course you will have to calculate how many you're going to need. Always add a little bit more because you will have to start cutting things out. Tiles will break. So I typically go with an extra 20%. That's what I do. But you're also going to need some glue. And this is pre-made glue that you can actually put onto the wall. But you can also buy the powder glue, which you add with water, and then it has the same effect. Now putting the glue onto the walls, therefore you're going to need some spatulas. And these are spatulas with different teeth of different sizes. Again, it depends on your tiles you put onto the wall. This is very cheap stuff. I like to buy this. I used to have a metal one, a professional one. But that gets dirty, it corrodes and all this. So I think these plastic ones are so easy, and once you're done, you can even toss them away if you want. You also will need a ruler, of course, because you will have to measure certain dimensions, a pretty good marker. And now we come to some more interesting things. You will have to cut out certain parts on the tiles, and therefore a diamond-based cutting wheel is perfect. Go for a very thin one and a smooth one. And you will have to put this on your angular grinder. That's the best approach. So yeah, you will have to have a grinder of some sort to do this. Of course, if you have a grinding or a cutting table with water, so much the better. Now I do have one because I placed a lot of tiles in this old farm here. But you can also do it with a grinder. And I'm going to show you that with the grinder and with the cutting table. Now obviously you will have to make sure that you work in a straight line, that everything is level. So you can use a standard level to start working, and I'll show you that in a minute. But you can also use a laser light. And here is my laser. It's a builder's laser, a very cheap one, but it does the job. I have a vertical and a horizontal axle. So I can place my first tiles very straight, because that's important. And we'll have a check on this in a few minutes. Now, there's a couple of other things you're going to need. As these tiles cannot sit flush to each other, you're going to need some spacers. And you can use these plastic crosses, and they fit in between the tiles. So one tile corner sits there, the other one corner sits there, and the other corner, you have the four corners of the tile. Pretty handy. I'll show that to you in a few seconds. They come in different sizes, but you can also use a rope of a certain size if this is what you want to use. Or, like in my case, I can use some of these plastic spacers that I have here, and I have a whole bunch of them. And this is also very handy to have the right spacing. And I'm going to show you that on the tile in a few minutes, why I've gone for this. And then finally, when everything is dried up, you will have to have some joint filler. And this is a special joint filler. This is the color I'm going to use because I want to match the color of the joint filler towards the color of the tiles. And again, this is up to you what kind of a contrast you want to have. Applying the joint filler is typically with a rubber spatula like this, and you can see this has been used quite a bit. And then once on there and it's fairly wet, then I'm having kind of a sponge that I can then rub onto it and we wash it down to make sure that there's no residue left on the tiles. So that's about all the kind of stuff you're going to need. So it's not very complex. If we're putting the tiles up, we want to make sure that the gap in between the tiles is the right size, and that again depends on the effect you want to create. And therefore you can use these little plastic crosses. They come in all kind of dimensions. And you just place them on the corners of the tiles on the wall or on the floor. And you see, then you get a nicely and even spaced gap in both directions. So both horizontal, you would have that, and vertical. The other method is to use a rope or a string of a certain size. You place it in between the tiles and then you close that up. Now this is typically how professionals do it. It is cheap and easy. Once the glue is dried up, you just pull the rope out or the string out and you have the proper gap in between the two tiles that you now can fill up. How wide this gap is, that all depends on the rope you're going to use. In this specific case here, I am not going to use the string or the rope, and I'm not going to use the crosses. Why? Well, I just don't have a rope of the right size, and the crosses that I have are too big because the lines in between the kind of fake tiles are pretty narrow, and I don't want to have this real joint here sticking out. So I'm going to use these plastic blocks, and they come in different sizes. Of course, this is a real big one. I don't want to use this one. But I think I'm going to go for the blue one, which is somewhere around 1 millimeter or so. So if I stick that in there, I think I'm having kind of the same thickness of gap or joint as what I see on the actual tiles themselves. So that is the reason why I'm using these plastic spacers. So we decided to start on this panel here, and now I need to draw some lines so my first tiles are going in properly. I know it's 44 halfway. So that's where my marker is. Now I need to make sure I have a straight vertical line on this marker, but I also want to make sure that horizontally this surface is actually 100% flat or level. So always work level. So setting out your level lines first of all. I'm going to use a standard laser to line this out, but you can use a pendulum, you can use a plumb, I think it's called a plumb, or you can use even one of those level meters that you have around, like this one for instance. This could be like this one, so you could draw the lines and make sure that everything is absolutely level and do it like that. Different ways, it's up to you. But I'm a lazy bum, so I'm going to use my laser. Right, I turned off the light so you guys can actually see the laser light. And there is my laser. This is where I want to have it. That's my place, and horizontally I will check it as well. So you also have now a horizontal laser and a vertical laser. And both should be quite all right. Let me double check on how that is. So the horizontal laser is right here, but you can see that the spacing on the left hand side and on the right hand side, this is nicely level. So this countersink right here is really level. I'm having my starting line marked up, and you can see that this is actually absolutely level. So this is how you can do it. I'm just double checking with a normal level meter. So this is 89.95 degrees. So this is good. to place some protective plastic, so I don't want to spoil the top here. All right, so let's put the glue up. And now we can put the first tile up. I have already my spacers on the bottom because I don't want the tile to sit really onto the counter at all. It has to have a little bit of space in between so it can expand and live, and that's what we will fill up later on with the silicone underneath. All right. Remember the spacers. So I'm just going to continue putting the tiles up. And this is how we're going to continue. This is the opening for the bolt for the hood. So I'm going to grind this out. If you're going to cut the tiles with a diamond blade, you might have some chipping. Right here, you can see all that chipping going on. It's going to be very hard to make it that smooth like on this side here. But the way to do it is really to put some tape up and then cut on the tape on that line. And then you will not have the chipping as what you see here. Now, it's not always going to be an easy cut of the tiles. Sometimes it takes a couple of trials to get it right. And this is where this one is going to go. So now you can see this closes nicely around the wall socket. We have proper gaps everywhere, a little gap on the side where it joins the wood, where we're going to put some silicone in. So we're going to measure this guy. Now, you should never be in a hurry. So this is 20, and the total length is 21. All right, so here we need to cut. And that should be it. Now, I always like to double check. I'm having a table saw for tiles, and it also provides water while you're cutting. So that, of course, is always very handy, but you have as well seen me using my angular grinder with a cutting disc on. So both will work. Now, the biggest advantage of this is that you have a very clean cut. So here is that little piece we just cut, and that should just fit perfectly. And always trial it can see that this is exactly how you want to have it. Of course, we don't have the spacers in yet, but we'll put those up in a few seconds, and then we'll glue it all together. So this is going to work just fine. All what we need to do now is to put the glue up and the spacers, and then that side here is as good as done. So folks, as you can see, we're moving along nicely. It is a lot of measuring and a lot of cutting, so take your time if you do this kind of work. And I'm going to continue now with the rest because it's always the same thing. It's always grinding and cutting and measuring and then gluing and putting the spacers up. And once I'm done with gluing the tiles onto the wall, I'll show you on how we're going to fill up the joints and how we're going to deal with the edges around the wood. So let me continue and I'll see you back probably in about 2 hours. All the tiles are now on the wall and I still have all the blue spacers in between. They will stay like this till tomorrow so the glue can settle overnight. And then tomorrow we'll fill up all the joints with the proper joint filler of the right color. And then finally we'll fill out the seams on the bottom here and on the edges with silicone so that the wood can live a little bit, because wood is not always in the right place like stone is. Things do expand and shrink a bit. So I want to have that sealed off on the bottom and on the sides. And then at the end we'll actually place back all the electrical sockets onto the wall and to trim on the kitchen. So we now have to wait till tomorrow. Now personally I think this motif looks quite alright, but I guess for some people this will be looking quite Gothic. But maybe I am just a Gothic guy. So the glue has dried overnight, so now we're going to start preparing the joint filler. I'm mixing it to a consistency of something like toothpaste, but a little bit more liquid than toothpaste itself. You really want to mix it well. You don't want to have it with any cluttery parts in it, because otherwise that's going to be bad. So that should be about right. So let's see. So I'm going to apply it like so and see how well that goes. So you can use different spatulas for that. I just swapped out one, because this one is a little bit more stiff, which is better. So now I'm going to go over it with my sponge, which is slightly wet, and we're going to try to wipe this as smooth and as clean as possible. Now you don't want to do this right away. You need to let the tiles settle a little bit, especially that joint filler. If you do it immediately, you're going to wipe it out. There we go. And in between the runs, I clean my sponge, right? So that's important. And you can see that this is getting very clean. And you're going to do this a couple of times. So rinse your sponge every so often and then start all over again, but make sure that the sponge is not too wet. And I keep turning my sponge as well, because you know, with the sponge, water tends to sag down to one area, as you just noticed over here, which of course is not what you want. And whenever the joints have settled a bit, but not really 100% dry, use a clean cloth, but one that is not having any things that stick out. So the cloth has to be very smooth. And we're going to rub everything off the tiles. We'll have to do this a couple of times. So with the wall all cleaned up, now the sockets can go back in, or at least the cover plates for them. And as you can see, this fits nicely around the tiles. We're going to put back the wooden trim. So folks, we are done. The tiles are on the wall, they are jointed up, and I know some of the joints, they are still looking a little bit dark, but that's because the joint is still wet. When this is going to dry up, it's going to be lighter gray. So all by all, I am very pleased with the result. There is one thing we still have to do, which is putting a sealant along the edges where it touches the counter and where it touches the cabinets, and that is something we will do tomorrow most likely. But that is just putting up some silicone, and that's all there is to it. So I think all by all, I'm quite happy. So folks, this is the end of this video, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And please leave any comments. If you despise this kind of tiling on the wall, please say so, and also say why it's okay. If you like it, well, I like to receive your thumbs up. And thank you for viewing. The next video will be all about painting this whole room, because we need to paint this room. And the walls will be a combination of light gray, like I have in the tiles, and some darker gray on another wall, and then the ceiling will be white. But I'll show you that once that is done. Thank you for viewing. Bye-bye.